Hey guys, Leland here with Bomb Table Tyrants, and I got Tim in the studio, and we wanted to talk about how hard D&D can be for new players. So I have had experience trying to teach my daughter how to play in D&D, how to teach my wife how to play D&D, and they have both, well, one has excelled at it, one has struggled at it, so they have their pros and cons. They both picked it up now and they've got it, like they are fully able to run with a session. One took a little longer, and I just feel like, to be honest, the character sheet overwhelmed her. And I think that was the main thing. Once I said, like, just put that down, don't worry about it, do whatever you want, I'll just tell you what to do, the stress went away. But that was like session 2 or 3 at that point when I realized, like, hey, maybe just put that down, don't worry about all the numbers. Pretty much I took it and read it, and I would just be like, you keep your dice, I have your sheet, you tell me what you want to do, and I'll tell you what needs to be rolled. And I just took over it that way for her for the time. Yeah. And then would explain, like, okay, in this roll, we're going to roll dexterity for this saver, and would walk her through it and point it out where it was going to be and why we were going to do that. And that helped a lot to be honest, get her out of the character sheet, because she would just be like, oh my gosh, this is too much. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that can be overwhelming for people.
And did you pre-make that character sheet?
Or? I helped her. She made a gnome druid, but I walked her through doing it. She made the character with me, going through the player's handbooks, doing all the choices. But
so I think that even that adds an added level of complexity and maybe an overwhelming feeling of, oh, I wrote this down on the character sheet, but I don't remember what it does. Now I have this whole book that I have to go back
to. Definitely. And again, I don't think it was helpful. If anything, it overwhelmed her to where she was like, oh, no, I don't know what any of this means. She would make the choices, and I would tell her how to write it in. But otherwise, the numbers, she kind of was just like, okay, I don't know what that means, but I'll put an 8 here, sure. But, it was more like, okay, what spells do you want? Like, she enjoyed the spell picking, the, what animals she might be able to turn into, things like that early on is what she, of course, enjoyed, because that's kind of a tangible, not number, math thing that you're sitting there trying to figure out, like, okay, if you take your wisdom and add it to this, that'll give you, your initiative and stuff like that. She was just like, okay, I don't know what that means. You just tell me when to roll.
Yeah. So. As someone with a very... Everyone tells me I have a really good memory, and so when someone brings up a rule in Dungeons and Dragons and everyone pulls their books out and starts to look it up, and I'm just sit there quietly because I already know the answer, but I don't want to take that away from anybody else. So, that's just how my brain works. It downloads all those things, but most people aren't that way. Mm-hmm. I've run games where a rogue had to look up the rules for sneak attack every time they rolled an attack roll because it just couldn't click with the way that his brain thought about the idea, and whether do you get advantage when you're sneaking up on them? How does it work? So it really depends on the player. I think in terms of overall intimidation or how difficult Dungeons and Dragons is, absolutely it's difficult. Mm-hmm. It's one of those games, and I play a lot of video games.
Yes.
There are some video games that have a super simplified tutorial system that teaches you all the controls step by step. Really good video games will kind of make you play through learning those controls. Yeah. So instead of just a thing that pops up and says, use the left stick to run around, it'll be like, oh, you got to run away from this thing. Use the left stick to run away from it, right? Mm-hmm. And play with it there. There's not really anything like that for Dungeons and Dragons. The player's handbook has the suggested build, but even then that doesn't tell you how to play. Right. That just tells you how to build. Mm-hmm. So Dungeons and Dragons fits more into the group of games like your Monster Hunters or your big MMOs where they've been around for a few years, where you can get in and you can learn it by yourself, and it's going to take a while, and there's going to be a lot of trial and error, and you're going to find some things you don't like, some things you do like. You're going to miss a lot of things that you probably wouldn't have if you have someone who's already been through it that's going to help teach you and guide you through that process. I think that's why GMs or players in general who have a lot of experience sharing this hobby with friends and family and other people, the way that you teach your family to play, the way that I've taught my friends and family to play, that's the most important part of this game. Yeah. Because trying to get into it on your own, it's tough, man. Yeah. There's so much to it. But having a guide to help you out, to walk you through step by step, can help so much.
I guess one of the other thing that I've seen that's been like definitely a detriment to it is almost the open-endedness of like you can do anything.
Yep.
Is like overload for people to like, oh my god, I can do anything. Like, okay, so what should I do now? And it's like, what do you want to do? So I've seen, and these are players that are video game playing players who love Skyrim, and it just kind of was like, just do what you would do. What would you do in Skyrim?
Yep.
Do that. I know that could go wrong in some instances.
Sure.
Whereas like, well, if I crouch down, can I steal all 10 swords from that guy?
If I put the basket over his head, you can't see me ravish.
So it doesn't work like that, because instead of an NPC controlled by a computer, you have a game master running it who can actually think rational thoughts. But at the same time, it's like, because that's how we tried to describe it to that player of like, you play Skyrim all the time, you love Skyrim, like this is just like that, like just consider that, do what you would want to do with that. But even that was too much for them, and they were just like, well, what do I do here? And it was like, whatever you want, man.
Yep.
So we tried to be encouraging and be like, yeah, every time they would say like, oh, I'll do this, we would be like, yeah, awesome, perfect, that's exactly, yeah, you're doing great. We'd try and encourage them, but I feel like even then they still were always just kind of like, I'm not comfortable with this, especially even talking back and forth with the GM. I was a player in this game, but they were. There was uncomfortableness in talking back and forth to a GM.
Yeah.
You could tell, like, if they had a drop-down window and they could talk that way, like Skyrim style, and be the silent player character, they would prefer that. They didn't love the interaction between two people, as make believe of this character and stuff like that. So they were uncomfortable with that, and I feel like that was definitely a hurdle for them that, to be honest, in that campaign they never really got past. They kind of like slowly stopped coming and just like never came back, and it was just like, oh man, like we wanted them to get it, especially because they were so creative, in all their other life things. It was just like they should have been like you would think they would be a great player, and instead they just like, it didn't really work for them.
Yep. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, it is improv, and improv is a skill that takes practice.
Yes.
It takes dedication. It takes a willingness to fail over and over and over again until you get it right or find your stride. And it's intimidating. Most of the hurdles that I get with new players at this point is, I don't want to have to be that social at the table. I don't want to have to come up with the lines for the character. People are getting to the point where they can say, okay, I want to sneak up behind this guy and stab him. Or I want to run around behind here and try and steal this thing. Those are the not as difficult decisions to make.
Yeah, definitely.
But being able to have that conversation, like you said, with the GM, with an NPC, that's tough. That's really tough for people.
Yep. And it puts them on the spotlight. I feel like that interaction puts them, if they're not comfortable speaking in public, even though it's, 5 other players at a table, maybe at the most. But if they don't know everyone, like that was the deal, is like, I had just met that player, so he didn't know me, for especially the first few sessions. So I think that was, he wasn't with people he knew, like core group buddies or anything like that. So that probably took a piece out of it, and that he's not with his known friends who he can be himself with and stuff like that. So that might be a part as well to all of that.
I've also had the opposite end of the spectrum be true, where it is a member of a friend group that wasn't a player before, but has seen the group have so much fun with it that they wanted to join in, and then they sit down at the table, and then it's their turn to talk, and they just lock up.
Just frozen.
So there's that sort of preconceived notion of, oh, this is so much fun, I want to get into it. And then the stress hits. It's difficult, and patience is key. Celebrating when they do stuff is key. I know a lot of players like to be the strong silent type, that Aragorn sitting in the corner smoking the pipe while just brooding over everything. And that can really work, but it's important that if you're going to play a player like that, a character like that, you don't have to say the things that character would say, because you're trying to be the quiet, brooding type. But you need to try to say what that character does. Describe the facial expressions, describe the body posture, things like that. And what that'll do is give the other players at the table something to play off of, and it'll get you practiced in talking about your character and describing your actions, and it'll sort of give you that improv practice that you need to eventually get into the conversations.
part of it to me is I would love a player character or I guess a player who's gets the books and reads all that. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know. To me, it's like, so he's gonna be a GM. That's that, or she. They are going to become a GM in time. It's just they're burgeoning.
Yeah.
They're growing into the GM they will become. Which is funny because I always say, like, all of my players are GMs now.
Yeah.
And I want to almost get back. I want to go find players that aren't GMs to have that player experience again, because, well, for teaching and for having, because you guys know it. Like, all these guys who sit at my table know the rules probably better than I do in most instances. And so therefore I want to get back to, which is what I go to our local game shop and just literally show up and say, you got new players, throw them at the table, let's go. And I like that, but it's I feel like those players, the player I want is the player who wants to be there, who wants to play it. They're the ones buying the books from the game shop and reading them. You know, they have the player handbook. If they have the books, that's a great sign for me. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm going with this, is like, what would you recommend for things you're looking for in a person who could be a player? Obviously there's those players that, you know, saw it on the internet, watched, Critical Role, and are like, oh, that looks fun. Oh, to me, that's not a red flag, but that is a, hey, we need to reset expectations of this is not going to be like that. It's going to be slower. It's going to be quite, a little slower pace most likely, because this isn't a, bunch of voice actors sitting around a table doing what their characters would do. This is going to be a bunch of nerdy kids playing their characters how they want. So it's rarely going to have that same type of feel. Now, there may be moments of that we have, but otherwise, that's why I'm kind of okay with players, being on their phones and stuff like that. As long as they're not disrupting the game or anything, there are times where you might not get, called on for 5-10 minutes and stuff, and you're dealing with other stuff. But I guess where I'm trying to go with this is things you're looking for in what you think would be a good player. What are the things you're looking for in that?
I think the biggest thing, and I am going to come back and touch on Critical Role, because it's impossible to have a video like this without touching on Critical Role.
I agree, yes.
The most important thing that I want from my players is it's not even from the players. It's a thing that I am offering out to the players that I want them to accept from me, and that is, we're gonna play a game where we're all gonna pretend to be other people. We're all gonna interact with each other. We're all gonna hang out and have a good time together. It's going to be stupid. It's going to be fun. You're going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. Everyone's gonna make mistakes. We don't care about the mistakes. Well, it's Bob Ross. If they're not mistakes, they're happy little accidents. And if they're happy enough, then we're gonna roll with them and keep playing that story arc. But I just want people who are willing to show up and just do the thing. And whatever makes you most comfortable showing up and doing the thing, that's the kind of homework that I want. You don't have to go out and buy every book, but if you're the kind of person who loves to read every single rule and learn every detail before they go in, absolutely go and do that. Now, even I, with my super crazy good memory, still have to look stuff up sometimes. So don't be afraid to go and look stuff up. If the research that you want to do is watching Critical Role, that's still great to me, because if you didn't watch Critical Role, then maybe you would never play Dungeons and Dragons in the first place. And even though my game's not going to run like Critical Role does, you're at least building those first couple stepping stones. And then I'll show you how we're going to compose my style of bridge.
And it's that investment of, you're in the books, you're watching the shows, maybe you're watching things on YouTube about it. That's what I want. Is that investment makes me be like, oh, they're going to be good. Like, they're going to enjoy this, and they're going to try.
My first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons was the Penny Arcade, audio only to begin with, and then it became Acquisitions Incorporated. But it was Chris Perkins, who now runs all of Dungeons and Dragons, teaching Mike and Jerry and Scott how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And Jerry had played back when he was a little kid, but Mike and I don't think Scott had ever played before, so it was their first time. 4th edition, pre-generated characters, this is how you do it. And the thing that I remember the most, the thing that kind of sticks with me is, as my core rule of GMing, is the very first thing they're doing as they're walking into this dungeon is Mike steps on the stairs, and Chris talks about how you can hear the crack of bones underneath his step. And Mike makes a joke about the bones, like, what kind of bones are those? And it's just a throwaway. And Chris Perkins turns around and says, hey, roll me a nature check. See if you know what kind of bones those are. And he turns that silliness back into gameplay.
Yeah.
For new players, that's a godsend, because
Yep.
that gets them thinking along the lines of, everything that you talk about, everything that I talk about, that's part of this game. That's the entirety of this game.
Yeah, definitely. Critical Role. Any other thoughts on that?
Yes. Critical Role is a great piece of fiction.
Yes.
It is a great piece of consumable content, and I appreciate what it has done to bring people into the hobby, because the more the merrier.
Yeah.
Maybe not all at the same table together at the same time, but the more people that want to play, the more groups run, the more chances everyone has to play together.
Yeah, definitely.
If you like Critical Role, don't stop there. Critical Role is great, but it is a cast of voice actors. They've been playing together for 5 or 10 years or something like that before they started recording.
Yeah.
And now they have years of playing as a recorded group. Go back and find the first Penny Arcade games. Some of those are absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Watch Dimension 20 on College Humor. Brennan Lee Mulligan is my new favorite GM. Just the way that he runs his games and the interactions that he has. So many of his NPCs are a positive influence on the character. And it's so easy to fall into that trope of the bartender's just trying to get through his day and he doesn't want to help you. You're just bothering him, making more work for him.
Yeah.
But what if that bartender was legitimately enthused that this group of adventurers came in and was like excited to see them, and that kind of reestablished how I want to put fun into my games. There's so many options out there. Dungeons and Daddies is a podcast. The Adventure Zone. While I don't agree with all of the seasons of the Adventure Zone, the first season is amazing for new players.
Yeah.
The second season, Amnesty, isn't even Dungeons and Dragons. It's Monster of the Week, but it's great for that storytelling aspect. So if you really want to lean into storytelling, there's all kinds of stuff out there. So don't stop at Critical Role. Look at others, try others, find what you like, take pieces of it, steal pieces of it, and then bring it to your table and make that how you play.